Hello, lovely people, and thank you for joining me again today. We have a guest today, my friend Beth. We're going to talk about a neurodivergence that I feel is very misunderstood within society. And Beth is going to help us to view what it really looks like. And that is OCD. I'm Leah Batlle-Rafferty, and this is Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. All right, so Beth, I'm so excited to have you. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Sort of what your hobbies are, what sorts of things you like, that kind of thing, just so our audience gets to know you.
So hobbies. Hobbies are playing World of Warcraft and genealogy, which I've done for over 20 years now, and I do help other people. My husband would love for me to make it a business, but that seems like a lot of work. And then animal rescue is also another one of my hobbies that I've been doing all my adult life. So
Okay, awesome. Yes, and I love your take on animals, and we have a puppy because of you. So.
yeah, that's true. Anybody that knows me ends up with an animal.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so how about we start with how did you figure out
That I had OCD?
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about that a lot in anticipation of talking with you about this, and I honestly have no idea. I just know that at some point in my childhood, but probably later childhood, I started to realize that the things I did, other people didn't do. And I have a distinct memory of being surprised and shocked by that. And I don't really remember. I know, when I go to the doctor, if I go to a new doctor or whatever, or I'm changing my SSRI, I bring it up. But I don't recall anybody ever calling, diagnosing me with it. It's also something that can be fairly embarrassing to me to talk about. Because once I start sort of listing out the things that I do when an episode is particularly difficult, so it comes out in bouts, right? Because I am taking medication. So normally as an adult, it only comes out when I'm very stressed out or worried about something. But when just recently I was talking to my son about this, and as I started listing the things that I have done in the past, what I used to do as a child, without medication or anything like that as a child, it sounds really weird in my opinion. Like I feel weird, like I'm weird somehow, and this is a lot. So no one ever really diagnosed it that I know of. But like I said, as an adult, when I tell a doctor, yeah, I have OCD, and they'll ask, well, what do you do? And they're like, oh, yes, you do. So, yeah.
Yeah. I know the feeling with at least with autism. Mm-hmm. So you're talking a little bit about your symptoms and what you did.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable talking a little bit about them?
I mean, yeah, sure. So as a child, it was a lot worse. And obviously in retrospect, that's because, and I think maybe I wasn't diagnosed as a child because I'm 53. We're talking the 70s. I don't even know if they had a term for it, or they wouldn't have thought to think about this or whatever. But one thing that I did as a child, and I still do fairly regularly, is when I'm reading a book. I love to read. I read all the time. I'm reading usually 2 books at a time. And right now I'm reading 3. I have to stop reading on a certain page, like certain numbered page. Numbers are a big deal for me. And I still do that. I did that as a kid. I do that as an adult. I argue with myself when I do it as an adult. Sometimes I'm like, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. And I can't not do it. As a child, the floor in my school was tile, and I would have to put my feet inside the tile, inside the space. I could not touch a line. And I found ways of doing that without anybody really noticing. Thankfully, I don't do that anymore. A lot of things that, are centered around numbers. If I'm really stressed out, like if I touch my one hand somewhere, I have to touch the other hand at the same time, in the same way, in the exact same spot. And if I'm into the counting phase, and I have to do it that number of times. Same thing with feet on something.
Do you have to start over or something if you don't do it right?
Yeah. Now, there's the pleasant things that people kind of joke about, with OCD, like, obviously the thing where you check, is the stove off before you leave? And sure, that's great. Like, you're definitely cognizant of making sure that nothing's going to burn down in your house before you go. But when I was a kid, I stayed a lot. My grandmother was my babysitter after school, and she had it too. And it was difficult for us to get out of her apartment because of all the checking that we did. But yeah, I always check the stove, especially if I'm tired. And so if I stay up late, before I can go to bed, I have to check the lights outside, the stove. Is everything unplugged? That's a thing for me also, which in Christmas time is tedious. And a lot of my Christmas stuff is still up, so I'm still checking that stuff every night. Are the doors locked?
So let me ask you something. I've said a few times that my neurodivergence, the things that supposedly calm me down also stress me in a lot of ways. It sounds a little bit like you fight with yourself over them. How does that, like, internally, like, how does that stress you, I guess? Like, how do you feel when you have to?
It's frustrating because I am an intelligent person, and my logic tells me that all of these things don't matter, that all of these things that I do aren't going to make any difference. Nothing bad's going to happen if I don't do them. Yet I just can't stop it. And, and obviously, because it does flare up now, when I'm stressed out, it's some sort of measure of control. It's that I'm reaching for a way to control things. Sometimes I'm not stressed out and it just appears. I don't know, but it's the way I've always been. Another symptom I had that I remember when I was a kid was I would have to, when I was really deep into it, have to look at something a certain number of times and blink a certain number of times. Luckily, my number, I had the same number, is not big. I was never a hand washer. That's one of those traditional OCD symptoms, not like religiously washing my hands over and over again. I don't do that. And it's interesting to me, listening to your podcast, wondering how it's tied into, because some of the things you say, I also do. So it makes me wonder, like, I'm a historian, I'm not a scientist, how that ties into autism, because I also haven't been diagnosed with autism. But
there are a lot of comorbidities nowadays. If you start looking on Threads or Blue Sky, you'll see people with ADHD, right? So autism and ADHD. So they found a lot of ties. So I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, there's one thing that you told me that I was in shock because I thought I was the only one I knew. 3-dimensional memory versus 2-dimensional. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And then I'll add in me.
I absolutely cannot learn by pictures or three-dimensional things, or I cannot do it. And it has gotten, as I get older, worse, because it's like I'll start to get anxiety just looking at, like, the inserts you get when you buy something and it has to be put together and it's a bunch of pictures. I will freak out. And that is, now that I say that, it is a little tied to OCD, because one of the other things that I am is a perfectionist, and I can't do it. I can't fail at anything, and I can't mess up and do it again. It has to be done perfectly the first time. And so knowing that I am not going to understand what these pictograms say and whatever will just freak me out. Absolutely freak me out. Can't do it. I need words.
So I mentioned this in my last podcast, which hasn't been released yet, so nobody knows that well, I guess they would have been released by the time this is released, but there is a thing called aphantasia, which is the inability to create mental images. And I absolutely, the first time I heard that term, it was like light bulb going off. I was like, I've always said this, but until now, nobody in science has ever mentioned this, right? Where like my head works almost like in symbols and colors, but it doesn't, and maybe sketchy images of things, but like not this like beautiful crystalline image that you hear people talk about in their past, And I think it's tied to that three-dimensional thing for me too.
I do have sort of a short-term photographic memory of words. And it worked really well for me when I was in school, because I could call up images of textbooks and stuff in my brain for tests. But again, those are words.
Right.
It's not, yeah. It's funny because my daughter, I was going through trying to get rid of all of the stuff we accumulate in life, right? That we really don't need to be holding on to. So I was going through my desks and I found some sort of testing thing that my daughter had when she was in school in Georgia, in elementary school. And the way that the analysis of how she took the test was, this child does not do well with images. And I was like, oh, she's just like me. I get that. Yeah. And I was horrible at geometry. Horrible.
I tell people I'm really good at 2 dimensions. You give me a puzzle, I can solve a puzzle faster than most people. Directions on like flat roads, I can figure out my way, no problem. The moment you add a mountain or a curve, or even elevators and buildings. Yeah. Like I go up the elevator and suddenly I'm disoriented.
So that brings up World of Warcraft.
Okay.
Because...
By the way, sorry, we both played World of Warcraft together.
I still do. She's left me. So the mountains throw me off in World of Warcraft.
Oh.
And elevators. Like there are a few dungeons where there's elevators, and I'm telling you, every single time I get on those stupid elevators in World of Warcraft, I can't figure out which way to turn when I get up to the top or down to the bottom, which, even though I've done these things over and over and over and over again, you'd think that I would know. Don't. Absolutely not. I'm always faced the wrong way.
I guess I'm in shock. Like, it's not something that I would think of as a symbol of having a neurodivergence. And yet here we are talking, and both of us having kind of very similar difficulties. It's really interesting. I wonder if it is, I wonder if it's part and parcel of everything. Okay. So my next question, which I just thought of because I thought it was interesting. I didn't know there were medications that you could take to help with OCD. So I just wanted to ask, like, How much do they help? How
Not
long have you
much.
been on them?
I mean, I've only been told, so I have depression as well. So I've only been told that the ones that I'm on have a side effect of that. But I've been taking depression medicine the majority of my adult life, and I've switched a few times, hopped around with them. But I've just been told it's like a side effect or whatever that it can. I don't know how. I don't take any. I am a strange person in that I feel these days that I don't necessarily have a huge problem with anxiety. So I don't take SSRIs that necessarily focus on anxiety, right? So, I mean, that's all I can.
Okay.
I don't know.
So that's interesting. So so it isn't necessarily kind of straightforward that it's like for OCD. It just
No.
happens to have some
Yeah.
effects
Yeah.
with OCD. Okay. Well, I guess to wrap it up, is there any last things you want to talk about or you can think of that you feel somebody like who might be wondering, right?
Yeah.
Might want to know or think about or maybe had never considered as a symptom?
Not really. I feel like the major symptoms people know, like the counting and the checking things, and those are all. I mean, not the counting part, but the checking things is a good thing. If you do count frequently when you're doing things, that's okay. So that's something that just sort of popped into my head. It just sort of happens in my brain where, like, say I'm chopping vegetables. I'll just start counting. I do any sort of task and I'm counting in my head. It just pops in. And it's not necessarily that I have to stop at a particular number anymore, but I'm still counting everything. That's a difference. That's another thing that people would probably like. Do you do that too? Welcome. So, and also the other thing, I think, the other symptom or the other aspect that was more of a thing when I was a child was that, so I was raised in a very Catholic family and I went to Catholic school.
Me too.
And some of it was religion based as a child. And I'm not sure I can vocalize what that means, but it was, you have to do this or evil will happen or something like that. It's hard to explain, but it was sort of tied to that. Don't know why. Doesn't happen anymore.
I did my ghosts episode. Everyone's heard my weirdness. So,
oh, I'm gonna have to
you
listen
haven't
to that
gotten
one.
to that one
I
yet.
haven't got to that one yet. That's exciting.
That's on my like scary
I
stories.
live in a ghost-filled house, so
yeah. You haven't heard my ghost stories? I'm sure. I thought I like told all my friends. But
no,
anyway,
but I can tell you about the ghost in my house.
that would be awesome. Maybe Halloween episode next year
Yeah,
will be
okay.
your episode. You can tell me all about it. Okay, so I want to wrap it up by just saying that Beth is an amazing friend. She's a great person. She's got a couple wonderful kids and one of the coolest husbands. He gets along with our family so well. She has been a world traveler and has had some really awesome adventures. So I think, just to put it in perspective, right? Mm-hmm. You have OCD, but that's not who you are.
No.
Right? You've had some really interesting life. You've had a really interesting life. You've done some really cool things. And so anyone out there who might be concerned that they have something like this, I think you just take a breath, right? And understand that, yes, it might exist, but it is not the whole of who you are. Right?
True. Definitely.
And you can have a very productive, I hate productive.
I don't want to be productive.
I don't want to be productive.
Trying to live
either.
a life of leisure.
There you go, leisure. A very exciting, interesting, fun life, right?
Right.
Despite the fact that you struggle with this.
Yep.
So thank you everyone for listening, and have a great day. Thank you for tuning in to Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. This podcast was written, edited, and produced by me, Leah Batlle-Rafferty. All music is by Carlos Neda. And today we were joined by Beth, Gary Watson. To send us an email, feel free to send to moanl@labratsolutions.com. That's MOANL@labratsolutions.com. And our website is www.moanl.com. And this podcast is part of Labrat Solutions, Inc.